right. Good evening, panelists, and good evening, audience. So we are in this panel speaking about women's participation in the economy after COVID-19, which has been a major shock to all of us. So COVID-19 has pushed lakhs of small and medium businesses to the edge, and many of them are on the point of closure. There are a lot of reports regarding this coming out. Today's Economic Times has a piece on small enterprises and COVID by somebody called Arvind Medirata. And he says that there are 60 million micro, small and medium enterprises. That's an MSME estimate that we all know actually. And 12 million Kirana stores and something like 13 million restaurants and catering businesses. And they contribute to about 1/3 of the GDP. So this is just to say that we are talking about a very, very important segment of the economy, and their contribution is very high, like to 1/3 of the economy, of the GDP. But our focus is on women workers, both as employees and as entrepreneurs. Now, one of the problems in India is that the workforce participation rate of women is very low, and it has been declining. It has been declining for more than a couple of decades. It was as low as 23% in 2017-18. This is using the National Sample Organization data, and it's much lower in urban areas. Surprisingly, we would think that it would be high, but it is almost like 16-17% in participation of women in the labor force in urban areas. And since COVID, we know that many men and women have lost their jobs or are working for fewer hours or are just earning less. So the household consequences that come from this is that the households go under tremendous financial stress. And women are faced with new challenges to add to the already existing challenges that they have had. But then on the flip side, we can see that this might be an opening, a new opportunity for women in terms of would it help us to change the status quo that women currently have and or change the norms, increase the workforce participation rate of women, have more women enter the labor force, though they will be having this double burden of work. So many of you might not have been there in 1998. There was a Shram Shakti report, which was one of the first, it was a National Commission on Women. And Elaben Bhatt of Seva was the chairperson of that committee. And, when I started by doing my PhD, that was one of the first things that I read. In fact, my PhD was on women's participation, but in agriculture. So she has the statement, which I use all the time, that all women are workers because they are producers and reproducers. Even when they are not so-called employed by our economic and statistical definitions, they are involved in productive and reproductive activities, reproducing labor, and they are absolutely essential for the survival of the economy. So, with this thing at the back of our minds, let me ask each of you to briefly introduce yourself and tell us what is it that you and your organization do. We will start with Ritu, who is from Ankur Capital. You are muted.
Thank you for pointing that out, and thank you for the introduction. I think super relevant. So yeah, as you mentioned, I am from Ankur Capital. We are a investor, so we invest in early stage companies. And what we're looking to actually invest in is companies typically technology led, but that can be disruptive for what we call the next billion. So how can the new businesses, how can new business models, technology innovations, business innovations actually create the businesses that are relevant for the next billion? We come in and support companies very early on, and for us, support means capital as well as whatever else is sort of needed in order to actually help a company get off ground and fly. The next billion, of course, has a lot of women in it. So if we're not going to make any difference to the next billion if women are not somehow part of all of this. And I'm glad you mentioned, from a sector perspective, the two sectors that we have a large exposure to are in ag tech and health tech. And interestingly, we see a lot more women in the health tech side. But I think what you said is very, very relevant is we don't see the formal participation of women on the other side because the names that get put are men. But I think the work at the back are the women. So every time I've gone anywhere in rural India, the women are doing the work, the men are sitting under the tree. So, but the formalization of that is kind of missing. But anyway, so just to cut that short, we're looking to invest in innovations here that can solve for challenges and markets that in these in the next million.
Jeemol, you're muted now.
So we can have Hardika, who's from Kinara Capital, to tell us about your company and you.
Thank you. And let me start by saying that we are addressing the next billion as is Ankur Capital by providing last mile distribution for financial inclusion of small business entrepreneurs. We are a RBI regulated non-banking finance company, and we are addressing the needs of the micro and small businesses, solving this missing middle credit gap by providing no collateral loans, business loans in the range of, in dollar terms, in the range of $2,000 to $25,000 for micro manufacturing and trading and services sectors. We are a social impact company and very proud to be a majority women-led company addressing financial inclusion. It is rare to find women-led companies these days in any sector, but certainly in financial services, you find that there is a huge gap. And one of the things we are doing in terms of inclusion is how do we address the needs of women entrepreneurs? How do we bring about that, if you look at from an SDG perspective, the decent work, economic growth, and gender equality for women entrepreneurs? How do we build a culture of inclusion internal to our organization? So about 15% of our organization is women, which is, where 1,000 of our employees are in the field. That's a very high number that we've been able to achieve, and still we need to do more. And in terms of building out unique products and services for our customers, working both in terms of how do we promote women entrepreneurship, but also from an organization, how do we also support women entrepreneurship? And we do a lot of that through our CSR work as well. So we have tried to bring about this thread of inclusion in terms of the next billion, but also in terms of women and equality and women entrepreneurship into our organization. So that's what we do at Kinara Capital.
Thank you, Hardika. So Dharitri Patnaik wears a number of hats. She's with FICCI, Flow, and with the civil society organization, and as an entrepreneur herself. Dharitri, would like to introduce yourself and your activities.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. And yes, I'm Dharitri Patnaik, and like she mentioned, I wear multiple hats. I was just wondering, where do I start from? So I am a chairperson of Flow, which is the women's wing of FICCI's Bhubaneswar chapter. Flow has 17 chapters pan-India with 8,000 women entrepreneurs and professionals as its members. And we work on women's empowerment, building capacities of not only the women entrepreneurs and professionals we work with, but also women living in poverty and women in different other segments and sectors. I run an infrastructure company. We are into industrial infrastructure. I also have a startup in hospitality. Now I know who to go to for funding. And I also have an NGO which works on women's empowerment. So we are focused a lot on enterprise and employability of women and getting them back to the workforce. And we work with the youth and the children because we think it should start very early, the whole, so we work with the whole spectrum of children, youth and women in my NGO, which is called Hamara Bachpan Trust. and we work pan-India. And here I'm representing FICCI Flow, and so in Flow we've been doing a lot of work this year under the leadership of our President Janavi Pukon, and the emphasis has been on getting more women back to the workforce and reaching out to as many women as we can through the various initiatives we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dharitri. So now we can see that we have a very interesting panel of women in working with women entrepreneurs and working with finance. So we have Ritu, who works as an early investor. We have Hardika, who works with providing loans and debt to small enterprises, women enterprises, and we have Dharitri, who represents FICCI as well as works with the NGO and is an entrepreneur. So now, looking at the future, looking at 2021, we've had a bad year, 2020. As the path that your organization is following, what can we do for, I'll say three things, so you can tell us whichever you would like to talk about. Increasing the workforce participation of women, which we just said was extremely low in India. Strengthening the women's socioeconomic status. Like I think Ritu was giving us a very interesting thing as to how the front office is the men and the women are actually doing that work at the back. And I see that a lot in the informal sector as well. And improving the financial health. If you say financial health, that is their own, their funds and their savings, their investment, and so on. So shall we start again with Ritu?
Sure. Happy to give you some of my thoughts of sort of where or what we see this. I think all three things that you mentioned are very, very critical. In our view, I think, the past year has been, of course, unprecedented, and that's the word that has also been used like all over the place. But I think from an optimistic point of view, I think there are opportunities that present to address the three things that you've just talked to, right? And how we look at it is that for the majority of women, there are a couple of challenges here, right? And how do we actually take a look at addressing those challenges for having them part of formal networks, formal employment, etc., right? So one thing that pandemic has done is made this kind of a digital environment for you to be able to work possible, which perhaps allows for addressing for whatever flexibilities that folks might need at home, for the fact that migrations may not actually be necessary at the level at which they have been in the past, right? So allowing a lot more women to then be included in what's happening in economies, or whether they're in urban economies or whether they are in rural economies, and actively participating in that, right? And the other thing that we feel is that what technology, and we've seen this over the last 6-7 years, and I think that perhaps over the next 5-6 years, as this digital penetration gets much higher, that and comfort level, moves from the man in the house owning the phone to other people owning the phone, that the ability to kind of do financial training, the ability to sort of do address some other needs, to just being able to access that person directly, create networks where there is a lot more peer influences, learnings that kind of happen, because that's, I think, a very important part, right? To feel disconnected, from just because it's another woman doesn't mean that you're connected, but if it's from the community or there are people that you see examples of, that's important. So in our view, technology allows some of these things to happen, right? And I'm optimistic that going forward, you will see this being leveraged by men and women alike to actually increase the workforce participation and make it more friendly, should I say, from saying, look, you have to leave home, leave everything behind, move halfway across the country, live in some untenable situations, for the economic participation. So I think that's what we are excited about.
Sure. Thank you. While we're talking about the the digital technology working well for women, we must note that more than 50% of women enterprises actually work from home. They are home based, but then they are in very minute kind of activities in the manufacturing sector most often, and sometimes in the service sector. So
but this just allows them to access markets, right? Without necessarily, you could still be working from home and you may run your home-based enterprise. But, as women become more comfortable with it, right? It gives you the ability, it gives you a more level playing field, right? And saying that, look, you don't really actually have to be traveling to Mumbai to be selling your stuff. You can access that market sitting and producing stuff at home. Right. So the enablement of micro enterprises, I think, is a critical piece.
Hardika, how would you address this?
Pick up the thread from what Ritu is saying. I completely agree that this creates a very large opportunity, which I think is bi-directional. And when I say bi-directional, what I mean is, women entrepreneurs who can now both access markets and also access capital digitally, which also, I mean, if you look at the data out there, it's the percentage of women likely to get a loan drops just because they're a women borrower and they go and, stand in line at a bank with a 40-page application and all the rest of it. All of that can go away with digital solutions. And so that's one side, access to capital, and then there's access to market side that that Ritu is talking about, which is enablement. And that provides that opportunity. And when in terms of getting on boarded to a lot of platforms that are coming up to address. So that's one side and one part of it. The other part of it is products and services, directed towards women. I do think that we will see, if you wanted to kind of talk about, what is perhaps a next wave, that to me, that's a little bit of a next wave that is and should come, right? About 89% of women globally manage their day-to-day spending. And yet most of them are unhappy with any kind of wealth manager because they don't feel that a wealth manager understands them or can provide a product or service that is relevant to them, or know how to decipher that. And so think about the ability, if we can now, where India has 4 times more smartphones than they did 3 or 4 years ago as a nation, and people are, through the pandemic, getting more and more comfortable with connecting with each other on platforms like this. We would have never done this last year or the year before, and here we are. And so even that interaction for women or women entrepreneurs, if we can talk about products and services that addresses their needs, and how do we create that last mile distribution or channel towards them that is digital based or a blended based, whether it's digital, physical, mix based, that can then be a product that they can subscribe to, which again they might not be able to easily get access to in the quote unquote pre-COVID era. And so I think the ability for technology to disrupt has always been there. All it is doing now is it's segmenting better, it's accelerating faster, and it's connecting the right people to the right sources, in however we want to think about it.
Thank you, Hardika. Yeah, so actually the challenge is how to create that last link for these women, and that last mile connectivity required, even in terms of finance and of course markets. Okay, we go on to Dharitri. Will you tell us about your? Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, no. There are so many. Women are not a homogeneous entity again. We have women who are educated, who have access to all the resources. Then we have women who do not have access to any resources. And while we talk about technology accelerating a lot of things, there's a huge digital divide also among the rural, uneducated women, and or who do not. It's not also not about accessing education. Women who cannot afford technology, and there's also not about affordability is also an issue. The services and infrastructure reaching them is again another issue. We do not have the adequate infrastructure. And coming back to why we have a low women participation in the workforce, India is one of the lowest. We have only 23% of our women in the workforce, and we are 50% of the population. And one of the main reasons is the structural constraints. We've talked about lack of access to different infrastructure and services, toilets, mobility is a huge issue, and social norms. So, still many middle-class families and think that if their daughters and daughter-in-laws work, that means they're not, the fathers and brothers are not able to, or husbands are not able to provide for them. So even with education, women drop out. They do not pursue their careers because of the social constraints and the cultural norms. And we found that mobility is a huge issue. So a lot of what do women want? So we did kind of an assessment as to why women are dropping out. So what do women want? So women want more jobs near where they stay. Women want adequate childcare, because if we do not have the social security support system in place, then women won't be able to work. Women are still overburdened with a lot of caring and nurturing and familial responsibilities. So how do we provide all this? And what are the sectors? All sectors do not employ women. There is still bias. There's still a wage gap between men and women. And so there are few sectors which employ women, and 92% of women are in the informal workforce. So many women in India work in the informal workforce, which do not come under any government regulations. So through my organization, through my NGO, Hamara Bachpan Trust, we've been mostly working with the informal women in the informal workforce and trying to see how do we provide them the labor cards, how do we get all the benefits, how do they access benefits. So one of the main thing to get women into the workforce or make them entrepreneurs is that they have the right knowledge and information with them. So there are so many government schemes. In rural, someone said that more women are employed in the rural areas because there are schemes like MNRGA, the Prime Minister's Employment Guarantee Schemes. So these schemes enable women to be in the workforce, while in the urban areas, women do not have access to this workforce. There's, of course, Mudra loans, apart from the other non-banking financial institutions. Government has the Mudra scheme through which women can access loans and set up the micro enterprises or the nano enterprises. So, and in FLOW is the women's wing of FICCI, and we are an independent entity from FICCI. And so in FLOW, we have this year an initiative called 3C. This is to enhance capacities, build confidence, and competencies, because we felt this 3 C's are needed for women to be in the workforce, either as employees or as entrepreneurs. And so what we've been doing is providing soft skills and job-oriented skills, and also doing the hand-holding for entrepreneurial activities. We work with women in different segments, women at the board level, so enhancing their capacities and competencies to be directors in the boards, encourage more women who want to start up, so what we're calling the homopreneurs, so who are at home but want to get back to the workforce, start their small enterprises, like someone mentioned that a lot of 50% of women work from home and have small enterprises. So support them in setting up their businesses, finding the financial institutions that are suitable to them. And we also work with professionals and women living in poverty or in the low socioeconomic segment, and providing them or skilling them, upskilling them, reskilling them, because things are changing so drastically. So reskilling them to compete and get jobs, make them more employable, providing them soft skills. We've adopted ITIs where we are providing soft skills to women students to ensure that they become employable, because English is a market language and people are not conversant. So building up their speaking English, spoken English skills, helping them to understand what is business, how to do business, so that even these students are groomed to undertake, they do have a choice whether to take up a job or to become an entrepreneur. So there are various activities that are going on to help women get back to the workforce. And we've also have partnership with NSDC, National Skill Development Corporation, for digital learning, with government e-marketplace to onboard women entrepreneurs, especially the micro and the nano entrepreneurs, to onboard their products and services to the government e-marketplace website. And we are working with with the distressed artisans. A lot of women also are engaged in the handloom sector, and so helping them to onboard their products into the e-commerce websites. And that's through digital training, hand-holding and support, helping them do their catalogs and all that, and working with women in the tourism sector. So it's more about how do we skill women who
We may have lost her.
I think we lost her. All right. So I think she's raised a very interesting point that women are not a homogeneous group. And I think as the three of our panelists have sort of covered different segments of women from different segments, actually. So that's very interesting. She's also raising this issue of structural constraints, social norms, and so on. And how does one address that besides the sheer finance? I mean, not having a smartphone, not having that financial resource to be able to go digital. So these are some of the challenges that we are facing today. So when we are talking about these three things, you know, the workforce participation, the socioeconomic status of these women, and then their financial health. So we move on to the next issue that we'd like to talk about is, you know, what do you think is the role of mentoring? In her introduction, Ritu raised this issue of networks. It's a really very important thing. It's not just for you know, it's just not for the entrepreneurs and for the women. It's for everybody. It also applies to academics like us. So the question is, what do you think is the role of mentoring to help women grow as workers or as entrepreneurs? And does your organization do anything to help mentor women? So we'll start with Ritu again.
Absolutely. So I think there are two pieces that are very important, and you know, I don't think this is specific to women. I just think it's specific to human beings, right? Okay. One is that for you to have role models in front of you, right, that are not so far off that you're like, okay, that's a different stratosphere. I don't even know how to get there, right? But are role models that you can achieve with some finite levels of effort, right? And the second is that you have an ecosystem here that supports you, right? As you know, we just heard that, you know, social norms, etc. I mean, you need a community that allows you the strength to speak out against what's not working for you, right? Or what's not right, essentially, right? And I think those two things are super important, and it doesn't matter which level you're at, right? So you could be a micro entrepreneur in a village, you could be a CEO of a Fortune 500 company. I think at the end of the day, these things are just important as to how we as human beings leverage and do that. So the traditional, I think the connection of the networks here hasn't been strong, right? Women are parts of communities, right? But sometimes those communities enforce social norms, not allowing you to actually participate, right? I think, again, you know, I'm sorry to be a proponent. I don't think technology is the panacea, but it's an enabler here, right, that allows some of it, right? And as you know, we just heard, all women are not the same, right? So all women in the same community may not be the same, right? But somebody, let's say, running a micro enterprise in Gujarat versus somebody running a micro enterprise in, let's say, Madhya Pradesh, right, might actually be facing the same challenges. And if you can create that community where you're discussing challenges that you face in what you're doing, whether they're social norms or business issues or financial issues, it just helps you navigate that space, right? And you're seeing some of these develop, right? So there are companies now looking at women as resellers or, you know, as micro entrepreneurs here, and creating those networks to allow women to actually, you know, relate and take those steps forward, right? I think at our level, we don't do this at the micro entrepreneur level, right? But of course, for our entrepreneurs, we do enable both pieces. How do you connect? How do you connect with other people that you can kind of relate to? How could you form a community, exchange ideas, exchange issues, and learn from it? And at the level of saying, how do I bring to you role models or examples, right? That you can then say, hey, look, you know, I can learn from that. That's achievable for me. How do I take those things? How do I look to get there? So I think these are the, to me, very universal things. And I see that playing out at our level as a fund as to what we do for our entrepreneurs and our women entrepreneurs. And at the same time, I see how these in businesses that work with micro entrepreneurs and micro women entrepreneurs, see how these two are being leveraged in those communities as well.
Sure. I think you raised a very interesting point that as technology is an enabler, but for women entrepreneurs, we still have to worry about how do they connect and how can you develop a community to which they can discuss their issues and learn from each other and so on. So basically, it's called networking. Yeah. So, Hardika, what is your views on mentoring?
Look, we need the trifecta here, right? In terms of what Ritu is doing, in terms of the equity capital, investing in early stage ideas and businesses that are either creating products or services for women or are women led, right? That's sort of one type of capital requirement. We need what FICCI is doing in terms of building a mentoring program, the networking platforms, the interconnections, letting you know what schemes are, Dharitri was mentioning, even letting people know what schemes are available to them. There's so much information. How is it applicable? How do you get that educational platform built and enabled? And tech may be one way to do it, and other ways that Flow is doing as well. And then, of course, once you have that business and you need operating capital, that's where something like a Kinara capital comes into the picture to provide the day-to-day running of the business as well. So one thing that I want to say specifically, like we run a women-only education, business planning, business education series for our women entrepreneurs. About 10%, just to give some quick numbers, we've done about 50,000 loans. About 10% of our borrowers are women micro enterprises, owned and operated by women. And we run this education series. And the one thing that is absolutely critical for us to take away when we have a larger conversation around, this homogenous group that is not homogenous, is that we often need to cater to the right level of education, right? Sometimes the women education programs or financial literacy programs are too basic. And you're talking to women who are running their businesses. They know what profit and loss is. They know how to optimize their resources. We need to, elevate that conversation with them and have the right conversation in vernacular, for them to get to the next level, help them with their business planning, their growth, their thinking, their long-term strategy, and not just, here's income, here's expenses, this is what profit is, right? And so how do we get to the right education at the right time across these layers of entrepreneurs and enterprises that exist, formal and informal, is one of the challenges I think we need to solve for us to move the whole women enterprise and just women in the workforce forward.
You're on mute.
We lost you for a little while, Dharitri, but we are talking about what do you think is the role of mentoring, and how does your organization, work with mentoring women workers and entrepreneurs?
This happens to me always during anything when technology is discussed. Technology fails me. Yeah, we've got a.
Oh dear.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
Now you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So I was just saying that, yes. So in Flow, we have a national mentorship cell, which provides mentoring support to its members, since we have 8,000 women entrepreneurs. So what they do is, there's this map out the entire 8,000 members, like who wants to be mentees, who wants to be mentors, and as per different sectors, industry-wise, and then they match them. So, and do this one-to-one mentoring. So, and the second thing we do is what we call our mentorship outreach program, where we mentor women who are not a part of Flow, but outside Flow. So this could be women in our ITIs, women we work with, because we have a village adoption program. We work with women there. We work with women on various skill development initiatives, like I mentioned, the 3C. So we do also mentoring there. So like to give you an example, in the Adopt the ITI program, we've adopted Bhubaneswar ITI. There are 225 girl students. So we've got the trades, they are engaged, what they are pursuing now. And we've got our members matched as per their industries and sectors, and they're providing one-to-one mentoring to these students. So that's how our outreach program has been. And we've been doing soft skills programs, and we have a globally acclaimed certified soft skills. And this soft skills program is also has a mentoring component to it. So we have our Flow members mentor these women who want to take up different enterprises. And suppose, for example, someone wants to get into the food supply chain or food processing, and we have members who that's in food processing and agriculture. So that's how we've been working.
I can see that Flow has a very active mentorship program, and it's really extremely important for their own members as well as for members outside. And adopting an ITI is, the women coming to this ITI, this fact that there are women in the ITI itself is quite encouraging. And that, you have mentoring them, and then, you're connecting the Flow members in various industry groups too. This is the kind of micro level work that, really needs to be done on a much larger scale to be able to, talk about what we're talking about, increasing workforce participation, improving their socioeconomic status, and of course, in the end, accessing financial capital and so on and so forth. So, when we had recently done a survey of students in Delhi colleges, both tech colleges and commerce and management colleges, and so we looked at both girl students and boy students. It's coming out as part of a book called Women Entrepreneurship, the Indian Middle Class. And one of the things that the girls said that they required was a mentor and a role model, more than the boys said. This is very interesting. So they can, even they're already visualizing it when they are in college. And of course, this is Delhi. They're of course a lot more advanced, I think, the children there. But that was an interesting insight actually that we got. All right. So to go on to our next, I'll sort of distinguish it into two. One is that, okay, now we've had this pandemic and, we are not quite out of it yet. So what do you think has actually changed for women and women workers, for the world as a whole, for all of us, but then for women and women workers? What do you think has changed? And then we'll go on to talk about, what we can do about it. Yes, Ritu?
Just unmuting myself. So I think the pandemic has obviously had an economic impact here. And I think the question really here is, has it in some ways limited how women can interact or participate because of industries and sectors that have sort of gotten impacted? And the second part, perhaps because of the nature of saying, look, are you able to sit out? You're pulling back from the workforce for, I don't know, if you don't have childcare, for example, right? And of course, women bear the burden of all of that and saying schools are not working, like, can I really go back to work, right? How does that all work here if I don't have support system here, right? So I can give you some examples sort of from, our entrepreneurs. And I said we have an exposure to both health as well as agriculture, right? One which I think is overtly very feminine, and the workers are much more women in healthcare, and the other one is not explicitly women, though underlying that there is a lot of women that sort of work, right? And what you see is that, look, healthcare as a sector has been hit in terms of what has happened, because just us accessing healthcare, just the ability to do a lot of other stuff in healthcare is limited because of COVID, and people have taken a step back. So anything, for example, that is a bit discretionary, you will put off. Those services have dropped. Women who are employed in that services are obviously going to get hit, and women are a disproportionate percentage of workers in healthcare in many settings. And we are invested in companies that are rural healthcare to sort of looking at women in urban areas as well. So your hit is what you see sort of kind of happening, right? So I think, so these pieces of it are obviously impacting women, and you're seeing a challenge for people to come back, because those sectors have a recovery time that is sort of taking longer. I have no doubt that the women will come back, because ultimately the women are the ones who are skilled in some of these sectors to actually deliver the services, not the men. So the jobs are not going to go away, they're going to come back, but recovery might take a bit longer. Yeah. I think these changes that we've seen at COVID, the positive part, as I already spoke, I think that for people to be leveraging people from a more digital perspective, so, there are stories that I have read that say, women realizing that, look, I can be anywhere to do this job, allows me to actually do the job. And so I'm doing, I am getting back into the workforce. And of course, there has to be an economic recovery for that, whatever hiring to sort of happen. But, I'm hopeful that that's a trend that actually gets more women in, right, going forward. So I think there's got to be a bit of hand-holding through this process so that it doesn't become like, there's a lot of doom-saying articles about like how, we were getting towards gender parity and all of that stuff, and now that's taken many steps back. I don't want to go that far. I think that we're all in a flux at this particular point of time. And, we will all have to deal with the fallouts of the pandemic, and women especially will have to deal with the thing. But I think perhaps if we create the support networks to leverage the good things about it, to actually push more women to actively participate, and we should push those trends now, because as a whole, Hardika also mentioned that, we've just had to change how we interact. So let's not lose that. Let's leverage that and pull people back into the ecosystem here, essentially.
Thank you. So, you're raising this issue of which industries. So one of the industries, like you said, health, it's the contact industries, where you have contact with human beings, is the industries which have fallen out. So, and you can have a lot of women there, including things like beauty parlors. Okay.
Yes, but at same point, sorry, just a minute, right? I absolutely agree, right? You can't make contact industries non-contact, right? But I think there are allied things as well, right? And that which haven't necessarily been leveraged for women workforces, right? And so why not, let's create, let's think of the other non-traditional women jobs, let me call it that, okay? And say, look, let's just not try to be pushing women into sort of being in healthcare and the physical contact piece of it all, right? What about the other stuff? There's a lot of back office stuff. There's a lot of other stuff here, right? Why can't we have more women working in those, right? So let's expand the pie, as opposed to, and use this moment to expand that pie, versus saying, look, women have to be in X, right? So that's where the support and sort of perhaps skilling, sort of what Dharitri is talking about, supporting, learning some of those things. It's a time that perhaps you learn some new skills, so that the pie expands. right? And we just don't work with that close-mindedness. Women work as healthcare workers, and now this is all women can kind of do, right? I mean, women can do anything. So let's just make sure we use the moment to actually make sure that they can do more than what traditionally has been being done.
Yep. Sure. Yes, Hardika?
Yeah, I have a sort of mixed feelings about this, and let me try to explain what I mean by that, right? For example, at Kinara Capital, we went literally overnight into work from home across the organization, and that we could do because tech enablement was already in place. I do know that it's, as it is hard for any organization to create an inclusive culture and figure out how to bring women in. The pandemic has given us the opportunity to say, look, you could be working from home and be just as productive. So how can we, to use Ritu's terms, expand the pie and give the opportunities to women? And I mean, here I'm talking about more urban professional women, let's put it in those categories, that, can be included in the workforce without necessarily always having to come into the office or ever having to come into the office into the future. A requirement we had created for ourselves only for it to be debunked by the pandemic, that we can still be just as productive and just as effective in the urban professional setting. So that creates tremendous potential for new ways of working as concepts become reality going forward. Now, mind you, what Dharitri was saying before, the social norms issue, Indian women are spending more than 30% of time on domestic work during COVID-19. These challenges don't go away. So the supporting system, we were talking about mentoring and programs and supporting ecosystems for the workplace and for entrepreneurship. We gotta have to figure out how we do that for the home place, and in order for this to really be a long-term sustainable going forward, inclusive idea for it to work. The second side that I want to talk about a little bit is the entrepreneurial side. The tech enablement has happened, right? Even at Kinara, for example, if you needed to pay a loan or pay part of your loan during lockdown, and mind you, fewer women took moratorium, women entrepreneurs took moratorium than men in our own customer base. Just to give you a sense, back to that responsible spending and thinking process. You have all these examples. We all have seen it, from the coconut guy to the, paper guy, who all now take Google Pay or Phone Pay or Paytm or everything else. So clearly adoption of tech and willingness can enable more women entrepreneurs to access new ways of connecting and working. However, at the micro enterprise level, where you absolutely, at the end of the day, you're making a product or providing a service, or you have to be in a storefront trade, buying and selling something, you need to physically be where your business is. And the pandemic might have given a little, time window, but we are all back to business, right? We see that across the country. All of our streets are back to business. Customers are back to business. And there, I would say, to really push the transformation of how do we find that balance for women entrepreneurs beyond the COVID time period or the lockdown time period is going to be the real challenge for us collectively, right? So I think we can solve the urban professional challenge a little more, simplistically perhaps, but the business enterprise challenge, I think, is far deeper. And we need to collectively think of different ways of public-private partnerships or civic-private partnerships to really enable some of those to happen in the long run.
Thanks. Dharitri?
Yes. So, I've got different experiences. So, during the lockdown, my organization was working with the police department here. And we were trying to follow up all the cases that were registered for domestic violence. And very interestingly, everyone was under the assumption there were reports that the domestic violence has gone up. But the women were saying, no, everything is fine at home. And then we were wondering, why was this? Because the partners were just next to them. They can't say anything. And there was the violence against women by intimate partners was on the rise, and that's one of the impact of this lockdown, I would say, more than the virus itself. And another thing we saw was when all the migrant workers returned, there were a lot of girls go and women go as who work in factories, mostly garment factories across the country. They work as domestic workers. They work as construction workers. They all and they all returned. And while after the lockdown was like open, the country was opened up. While the men returned, the families did not allow the girls to return back to work. So this throws a challenge that we need to provide different kind of jobs right now to the girls who are not allowed to go back to their work, upskill them, reskill them, and of course I've been talking about the digital divide and how important it is for every individual to be digitally trained and skilled. Because this is in this new normal, everything is happening in the digital world virtually, and technology plays a very important role. Most of us take it for granted, having access to technology in that sense. So then we found among our women entrepreneurs, we have a huge section which have startups. Everyone was in a bad shape. Most of the startups were in a bad shape because the fundings had suddenly stopped. Their markets were restricted. So they had to rework on the revenue model. I myself had to rework on my revenue model. And the investors who had committed dropped out. So a lot of startups also faced issues, and they wanted to redesign, reinvent their businesses. And then businesses face, like in my infrastructure company, we faced a huge, the pending dues by PSUs, by private companies who were not. So liquidity became a huge issue. So as a woman entrepreneur of an MSME, I faced huge liquidity issues. So I think women as entrepreneurs, women as homemakers, women as workers, daily wage earners, this COVID-19 has impacted our lives. And like I had mentioned earlier, our familial duties have increased a lot with online classes for children in the urban areas, and although we have to all go back to office and work, children are at home. So a lot of issues, and then like I mentioned, because domestic workers did not come back from the villages, so people had to face issues. So it's been like, so everyone, and no one was left out in, being impacted by I'm going to discuss what can be done, or that's the next.
So for the last, I think we have our last round now. So what can be done, and also any thoughts with regard to public-private and public-private civic society partnerships, which might help these two things. One is to increase women, and then the financial health situation kind of thing. We'll go again through Ritu.
I mean, I think there is just a need for us to set up more, support kind of networks that are and learning, right? I think Dharitri alluded to this, that there was a lot of learning, digital, non-digital, whatever it is, right? So I think it's absolutely imperative that we do, it's just like, say, look, you have to give a child an education, right? For the child to get wings to fly, right? I think it is imperative for us to give women I don't want to call it education, but the support, right? It's not that women aren't educated or whatever, but it's the maybe the extra nudge to fly, right? And I think that's whether it's through public-private partnership, whether it's through private, whether it's through charitable, I think all aspects have to kind of drive towards it. Right, so inclusivity has to be part of the DNA of men, women, it doesn't matter, like of everything that we sort of do and whatever that needs to get to it. I mean, it's unacceptable that there are 50% women and 20% or whatever. I mean, we face this in our business where, if I take a look at it, we don't get enough solicitations from women entrepreneurs, right? And that's not right. I mean, if I say, people say, oh, you get 20% or 30%, that's really good. I'm like, no, that's not the statistical distribution. That's not right, right? Fundamentally. So we're still off. And why are we off, right? And what is it that we can do so that there is, this comes to an equality situation. I think that gap needs support.
Yes, Hardika, your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think personally, I feel we need to change the contours of marking and measuring that we do for different situations, for different types of businesses or professionals. We seem to have the same lens for everything, right? So whether it's in the corporate world, we all have to be in this high-paced, outcome-based, upward movement, and if it doesn't happen, then we are not good enough, or something like that. Or whether it's in a business, then if you're running a slow-growing, sustainable, profitable business versus, fast-growing, take lots of money and blow it up, then, we value the non-profitable unicorns or soonicorns or whatever it is, right? We need to change the frame of this conversation when it comes to women businesses, women professionals, women in leadership, women of all kinds. And we need to, for ourselves, as women, start that conversation differently, have that conversation from a different point, and accept that our journeys are going to be our own and not driven and decided by all of these names and numbers that are thrown at us or pushed at us or given to us by everybody else. So that's probably, it's easier for me to say this in 30 seconds and much harder for us to collectively figure out how to do that. But that, to me, if we can, at least make some strides towards that, then maybe more women participation in business or women in business or women in leadership, all of those things will automatically come from it.
Very interesting. So, I think we'll move to Dharitri because we might be running out of time. Yes, please.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, in terms of, I think this situation, the pandemic has thrown up a very unique situation, and we should convert all our challenges into opportunities. There's a lot of scope for public-private partnership, for private-civic-public partnership. And to begin with, we need to have the right kind of infrastructure. We saw how the country was grappling with the health infrastructure. So we need to have the right infrastructure and services for women, be it daycare centers, be it from implementation of POSH, which is the prevention of sexual harassment at workplaces. We have the right policies and frameworks at place, but they're not properly implemented. So we should ensure that. And the third thing is we need to provide jobs or an ecosystem that enables women to come back to the workforce. So open up more sectors, like someone was saying, why is it that we need to have certain sectors for women? We should open up all sectors and ensure that the businesses, the private sector provides the right kind of environment for women to come in and work. So that's something which we can do. And of course, everyone has to play a role to ensure that women get the right benefits, right services and the wages to return back to work, and the support. I think support is very, very essential. And something I think while I was speaking, I had got logged out, was the psychosocial impact of this pandemic, and how important it is for women to be not only, because most of the time we are the caregivers, so also to be skilled in psychosocial counseling and provide that. So even that kind of taking care of mental health and of course the financial health, providing the right linkages. So there is a lot of things that needs to be done in terms of infrastructure, services, the financial linkages, mental health, physical health, things we always took it for granted or never noticed. They need to be in place for women to get back to work. And all of us have a role, be it in, like I'm in almost both the sectors, both civic as well as the private sector. And I think we all have huge responsibilities towards the society and especially towards women to be back in the workforce.
Thank you. I think we've had a most engaging conversation with the three of you who are from different operating with women entrepreneurs, but then at different levels and different stages and so on. So, like I said, while we do this broader scan of women entrepreneurs as an academic, we did come up with this point which Hardika is raising with regard to the goals that women entrepreneurs, aspire for. They don't necessarily aspire to, to grow, in the sense that, I have seen this, the children who come out of this IIM Ahmedabad, where I'm actually located. So are we done? Sure. Okay. So thank you all very much. And I think that was the most interesting conversation we have, and I hope our audience have enjoyed it.